Okay, so before you start, we're gonna say one real quick thing to everyone who has listened to the last couple of episodes. Thank you. That's super cool and nice of you guys. And because we are very much encouraged by the fact that you've been watching us, we decided that we're going to take this a little bit more seriously, and we're investing a little bit into Riverside FM, which is kind of cool technology that's making a lot of the editing process of the podcast go by a lot faster. We definitely recognize that the video quality of the last episode was not what we wanted it to be, so we're taking your feedback, and we really appreciate that you guys have been watching and listening and talking to me in the shop and talking to my dad in person. So hopefully with this new system, you guys will be able to enjoy this a whole lot more than you have been for the last few weeks. Yeah, what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about it because there's so much. I think the video quality is a whole lot better. I like the format a lot better because it's not switching back and forth between you and I.
Yeah.
And it's we're both up here. So it gives the same appearance that we have. So like I'm looking at my camera and I'm talking to you. Uh, but there's just a whole lot of like body language,
Yeah.
listening language that
Yeah,
you.
and I think that there's so much that this is coming from working in call centers for like a decade. That was one of the things that we always talked about is, communication is really only about 20% of words themselves. And this is why I hate text messaging, because you don't have vocal inflection, you don't have body language, you don't have that ability to be like, and like you can see somebody kind of being uncomfortable with the conversation that's going around, and I love that now we can kind of showcase that dynamic for anyone that's actually wanting to watch the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think uh it's great technology, and it works to make sure that the video's a better quality. And we had a little bit of a problem with that last time at the
Yeah, and I
beginning
don't.
of the episode, and we were just using Google Meet. So it's a free software, anybody can use it. But Riverside is it's it's not free. You got to pay for it. But because you got to pay for it, they know that they're building a product for podcasters, and
To
I'm
that
looking forward
point
to it.
though, I think that there's something to be said about, I just got back from getting my hair cut. And I was listening to the barber next to me talk to his client. And they're talking about, oh, it'd be really cool if we just started a podcast of like shop talk and stuff like that. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, I mean, that's what I'm doing with my dad. That's kind of cool. But the way that they were talking about it made it seem so inaccessible. And yeah, I think it's great that we're in a space that we're wanting to take it a little bit further. But if anyone wants to start a podcast, like there is so much free stuff out there, and you can post it wherever you want. And like even the video cast, it's pretty cool that you can get traction pretty quickly if you are just committed to doing it.
Yeah, and there's you're absolutely right that it's so easy to do. There's people like to say that the advent, at least I like to say that the single most impactful uh, invention, technological invention in the history of the world was written language.
Mm.
Before there was a written language, no knowledge could be transferred beyond person to person to person to person talking, oral traditions. But as soon as we were able to write stuff down, man, we've got libraries from the Babylonians, libraries of Aramaic sayings, libraries from Egypt, and now that same capacity has been transferred back to the oral tradition. So you can take knowledge and preserve that knowledge without having to write it down. You can just say what you want to say, and all the things that you were just talking about, all the visual cues, all the audible cues, they're all preserved. It's a pretty amazing time to live in, particularly when you start thinking about AI and the fact that AI can listen to and understand all that stuff.
Can do
Uh,
so much.
yeah, yeah, it's
And
a really exciting time to be alive. I think Elliot, my grandson, your nephew, is going to have a very interesting life.
it was AI was a big conversation in the barber shop about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I absolutely was against it, 100%. And we have a lot of shop clients that work at like Micron, and oddly enough, Boise has grown into such a tech town that there are so many software and development jobs and engineering jobs. And one of my best friends works for Microsoft. And, about a year and a half ago, all the major tech companies did 10% layoffs. And if you're paying attention, you know that that's happening multiple times in the future. And the thing that I was really looking at was the fact that, man, so many people are going to lose jobs, and legitimately that will happen. But I think one of the most interesting things about the American spirit is our resiliency and our ability to bounce back, and the empowerment we have to be able to do things that we want to do. And I started using AI for little stupid things. But the first thing that I did was I need to solve a problem in my marriage. I'm going to go to AI for that. I come home every night at 7 o'clock, and my wife and I have the exact same conversation of, what do you want to eat? I don't know. What do you want to eat? I don't know. What do you want to eat? And it's the same conversation that every married couple has all the time. And I was like, I'm sick of spending 20 minutes on this conversation. I'm just going to tell ChatGPT what's in my fridge and to come up with a menu for the meal. And the entire time that we would have normally spent trying to figure out what dinner was going to be, I was making dinner with stuff that I didn't need to go out and buy. And then I started having a little bit of fun with it. And I was like, okay, I want to learn stuff that I've never done before. I've never made a risotto. I've never cooked rabbit before. I've never done XYZ. So, like, give me an idea on how to do this. And I started turning it into a game. And like, you went to culinary school, so you have a lot more familiarity with being able to improvise with foods. I don't like. I am the guy who can eat the exact same thing over and over again. Food is fuel. It's fine. I love cooking, but I can't really think about it. So I can use AI to give me a couple of curveballs, and it's like, okay, well, prepare it in a skillet until done. I don't want to risk it. Can you change the recipe so that way I'm using a pressure cooker? Yeah, here's a new recipe. Awesome. Now I can set it, forget it, and do something else. And once I started getting empowered with that and realizing, oh, you can prompt it in different ways and you can give it different personalities and it can help you. Like this morning, I spent 2 hours updating some legal documents. And then instead of paying my lawyer to do all the document preparation, I just sent over the document. I was like, hey, can you take a look at this really quick and just make sure that it's good? Cool. It really can be beneficial if you're looking for the benefit in it.
Yeah, it's so funny when you mentioned culinary school. The thing that I always think of is, a few years ago we had a mass shooting at a grocery store here in Boulder, a King
Yeah, I
Soopers
remember that.
grocery store. So and that grocery store was was in the same shopping center as the culinary school. So when I was going to culinary school, there were two grocery stores in that shopping center, and I every time I was on a break, so like before school, every lunch, every time I was on a break that was long enough for me to go, I would go to the grocery store and I'd go through the produce section, talk to the produce manager, and just taste things. Let me taste this fruit. Let me taste this vegetable. Let me taste I'd go to the butcher and we'd just talk about different meat cuts and and really what I was trying to do was develop a palate.
Okay.
So that if I had an ingredient, I knew what that ingredient tasted like. I knew what it'd pair with. I wouldn't be like surprised at the that a star fruit is really kind of bland. There's not a
Yeah.
lot of flavor to it, so you've got to add something else to the star fruit so that it's got some flavor. So anyway, that it but and that kind of knowledge is 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 not easily transferred by AI. It's best transferred having a conversation with the produce manager, having a conversation with the person who runs the bakery department. Um, uh, so anyway, I think, but as far as like AI goes, dude, I use AI every single day. I haven't used Google for like a year. I never use Google for a search. I always use AI. And like
Rivers.
beyond just search, so I'm
Oh,
in school. So I've got a lot of writing assignments and the writing assignments also have your video just went away. Now you're back.
that was weird.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're sitting here talking about how great this new platform is on video quality, and all of a sudden your video drops out.
well, and it said that I didn't have any internet on my side, and I don't know what would have happened for that because like Haley's in the next room working, so must have had a weird glitch. We'll see how that turns out.
There's and so but anyway, so like I use AI as a research assistant. So I'll have to use I'll be required to have 10 different sources for a writing project, and five of the sources have to be journal articles, something, published in a reputable peer-reviewed journal. So I end up with all these PDFs, and I have to discern somehow which studies are worthwhile for me to use in my paper. So I'm able to just upload the journal article into an AI, ask the AI to give me a summary of what the article is, and then once that article's inside the I just have a conversation with the AI, like I had a graduate research
Yeah.
assistant read this thing for me, and then I'm like, oh, okay, well, what are some key lessons that you learned from that? What are so I Yeah, I use AI. Um, Now I never and I think this is one of the things that's different. It's like now with Copilot and all these AIs that are designed to respond to an email or to write a business proposal or to to do those kinds of things. I don't use it that way at all. I might have it write a summary of something for me, but and then I'll use that summary as like the outline that I'm going to follow.
Okay.
But I always read what the AI says, and then I write what I want to write, so that it's in my voice, and so that it's again, I'm in school, so there's the whole academic integrity thing, uh,
I
where
oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, no, that's all I was going to say. I've just got to be careful that I'm not
Plagiarizing.
plagiarizing from a source without qualifying it.
I had the other day I had to make a new article for the barber shop. And one of the things that is like the whole barber shop started out as an online blog. And I was going to kill myself. I was literally in suicidal ideation, and I decided to change careers. And I was writing about it, and it was just kind of the therapy that I was doing. So I have dozens upon dozens and dozens of blogs for the past few years talking about going through this experience, and anytime there were new things going in the shop. And what was really interesting about that is I have a style of writing, and it's a very
Mhm.
distinct style of writing. So this last week, you're aware of it. There's some pretty devastating news for me that came into the shop, and I was having a really hard time being focused on it, because anytime I was looking at it, it was just like, this sucks. And I had to respond as a business owner to something that happened at the business. And writing that article was literally breaking my heart. I was sitting in front of my computer, just like, I can't do this. I cannot do this at all. And like, I got to a point where I was like, I'm not going to do this. So I just literally copied and pasted every single one of my articles. And I said, I need you to create an article that's in my voice based off of the voice that I've already put out there. And this is the message that I need it to be. And I need it to be really uplifting, because I'm not capable of doing that right now. Um, and man, it did a good job. Like, kind of like you're saying, there's definitely, it gives you what it thinks it needs to be, and then you should absolutely go through and give it your own personal touch. But it was pretty damn close to my voice. And one of the ways that I always really determine, is this me or not, is after I'm done writing everything, I go through and I read it out loud. And if it naturally comes off my tongue, if that's my vernacular, if that's, part of my natural ebb and flow, as it were, yeah, then that's my voice and that makes sense. But if it sounds like I am being forced into saying something that is far superior than the language that I typically like, I don't, you can kind of tell that. So I think that you can wind up using it in that situation where you can imitate a voice. I would highly encourage people to imitate their own voice and then make sure that it is their own voice, as to prevent any kind of plagiarism ideas.
That's when I was in my depression, I was writing as well, but I was writing poems.
Yeah.
And the way I started writing poems was kind of interesting. I was reading an article in AARP magazine, written by it was an interview with Bob Dylan, and it was after Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for literature. And when I read that, I was like, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for literature? That just didn't seem right to me. So I read the article, and that's basically what Dylan was saying. He's like, when they called me and told me I won the Nobel Prize for literature, I was like, you got to be kidding me! I write folk songs, and so um, anyway, so that was an interesting article, and then I listened to the recordings of his Nobel presentations, and so I started thinking about Dylan as more of a writer of poetry than a songwriter. So I would write his songs down, and when I would walk, I would carry those songs, the lyrics to the songs, on cards, and I would read those out loud. And in that reading, I was like, wow, he is a poet, and there's a synchronization and a rhythm to his words that you don't hear when he's singing,
Yeah.
because he's got such a ripsaw. Yeah, he's got such a ripsaw
Yeah.
style of singing that you don't hear the rhythm in the word. So I started doing that, and I still do this. So I walk around with index cards, and and there's I kind of learned this from Eminem. So whenever things will come to me one little lyric at a time. So I'm like, oh, three birds and three stacks. My mind's in attack. So I would write that on a card, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I've got this thing, and I would link those cards together in order to write my poems. And it's so funny, my poetry voice, because again, I was doing this while I was in a pretty dark depression. And
It was very
uh
Southern drawl.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I would go to open mics and I would perform these poems. I would recite them at open mics.
Or city council meetings.
I did do it at a city council meeting. That was kind of funny actually. But uh uh but somebody came up to me once and they're like, "Yeah, you've got this interesting style that's like a dark Dr. Zeus." Um so so that's my poetry voice is a dark Dr. Zeus.
It's funny that you mentioned Bob Dylan because with everything that's been going on in my life, I literally went straight to Bob Dylan. He's not part of my normal uh uh listening repertoire. I've definitely gotten. It's weird because like obviously I grew up in the punk rock community and there's a lot of ska and hardcore. But in the last couple of years, I've gotten really, really into Appalachia folk music. And it's weird because it makes me feel like a kid again growing up in Georgia, even though I hated it back then. And there's just, I don't know, there's something about it that really connects with me. And I have listened to Blowin' in the Wind and Times Are a Changin' so much this week because that's the thing that Haley and I have been talking a lot about is like right now is a season of rebirth for me. Like there's a lot of changes that are happening for me. I'm going through this whole rebranding of the business and I'm now having to hire people and I'm having to deal with things that I wasn't really prepared for. And I was like, yeah, Dylan's kind of the one. And it's really been helping me. Like I have this little thing in my shower that I actually put my phone on so that way I can play music in the shower and it's like the first thing that comes on is Blowing in the Wind and I just sing that in the shower. I feel a whole lot better because it's something that is very relatable to me and I think that that's one of the amazing things about poetry is when you find something that you connect with or if you have that ability to really put words to emotions which is such a hard thing to do for people and I think that that's one of the interesting things about the idea of this podcast is a lot of people struggle with their emotions and a lot of people struggle with really communicating their emotions and especially when you're in places of anger or discomfort or unknowing it's really hard to navigate those spaces if you don't have the tools for it and somebody was actually asking me in the shop how am I doing this with you and I was like, oh, I mean, ultimately, we have a lot of respect for each other. We have some elephants that are in the room, and we're working around those. But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for you, and I think that you have a lot of respect for me, and I think that that's kind of the foundation to be able to have a space where you can learn to navigate some of those negative areas. And it's so unfortunate that people don't recognize that you're going to have negative emotions with family. Those are the ones that you can practice that with.
Yeah, there's one of the poems that I wrote is actually called My Fucked Up Family. There's so so yeah, there's lots of emotions that come with familial relations.
Well, so we'll put one thing out there. I think some of the feedback that I've heard from two people is like you and your dad have a really good relationship. And I think for the first couple of episodes, we kind of have conveyed that we have a really good relationship. And for a good couple of years, I don't think that that's the accurate depiction of where we were. I wouldn't necessarily say that we were um, hateful of one another, but we were certainly weren't working on any kind of relationship. And I think back burner is the easy way of kind of putting the relationships because you were in a dark place, and I didn't want to be near that dark place, and there's definitely some things that you did that kind of pushed me away. But I think that what's really, really interesting is as soon as you can get to a place where you're both saying, hey, this is not where I'm at anymore. Let's move forward with this. And you can still continue having that bit of respect, then it really becomes, okay, how do we do this now? How do we start over again?
Yeah, there's for me it was it all began. Well, actually, I think it began a little bit before. It really started when I retired, and initially my plan was to move to the Treasure Valley in Idaho and plant a church. But September 11th happened,
Yeah.
and it completely changed my trajectory. And I and there's I had an interesting experience. I was still on active duty, and a friend of mine called me because my retirement was approved in August of 2001.
And at
Um,
that point, you were right at 20 years in the military.
yeah, yeah. So I had decided that if I didn't make sergeant major in the secondary zone, I was going to retire. So the first time I went in front of a promotion board for sergeant major. I didn't make it, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to retire. And so that retirement was approved in August of 2001. And then September 11th happened, and I was like, man. Um, but in my mind at the time, I thought that the military response was going to be very similar to uh, Grenada, Kosovo, Panama, Haiti. There's all these operations where we went in, we did what we needed to do, and then we got out. I don't think, and nobody that I knew thought that we would be in a war for 20 years. Most of us didn't even think that we'd be in a war for more than a year or so because everybody knew that where Al Qaeda was.
Right.
It wasn't a big secret, and Afghanistan is one of those places uh, where I mean you can just uh, bomb people, pay for because there's already so much political turmoil. Pay the opposition to do your the lion's share of your fighting for you. Anyway, that's what everybody that I knew thought that at most we might be fighting this thing out for a year or two. But what was really going to change, and it became apparent it was really going to change, was the way that we approached counterterrorism operations in the United States. So when a buddy of mine called and he said, "Hey, they're starting this new uh, uh, government agency called the Transportation Security Administration. You might want to get involved." So I did. I responded to the email. I went to L.A., went through an assessment, and I spent all of 2002 just going from airport to airport to airport all around the country, federalizing security forces.
I uh
And
I
go ahead.
remember visiting you in Ohio and the
Yeah, that was a
horrible
pretty funny visit.
so there was there's an old website that used to exist and it still does exist. Actually, funny enough, George R. R. Martin, who writes the Game of Thrones series, he still has an active live journal. And one of the things that I always think is fascinating about you as a baby boomer is you have always embraced technology, always. And you are not behind the curve like a lot of people in your generation, and that makes having these conversations so much easier. But I was on LiveJournal, and we had just moved to the area, and I was trying to make friends, and I meet this person online who was from Columbus, Ohio, and she and I just start talking, and then mom comes to me and says, hey, your dad's gonna be going to Columbus, Ohio. We were wondering if you actually would want to like spend a week with your dad. And I'm like, I just met a girl online, and it's like what 2002? Because yeah, I was 16 at the time, and yeah, this girl's giving me attention, and sure, the federal government wants a 16-year-old hanging out with his dad as he federalizes the security force. I'll go hang out with dad. So this is before cell phones and before like I would have a pager or anything like that. And I go to Ohio and you're about to go to work and I'm like, "Hey, are you cool if I hang out with a complete stranger that I met on the internet?" And you're just like, "Yeah, that's fine." And we had a great day. We had a fantastic day. And then she's about to drop me off at the hotel, and we're hanging out in the parking lot. And then we just start making out. And this is the first time I have ever been kissed. I have been homeschooled my entire life, and I'm just like, oh, it's finally happening. Meanwhile, I haven't called in and checked in with you all day. It's like 10 o'clock at night. So I just remember being in the car and looking up, and all of a sudden, your eyes are affixed to mine, and you're just like, oh, we're going for this.
Yeah, I'd been looking for you. I was worried, man. I was like, oh no, there's
Well,
I
you were
think
like
there.
calling all the law enforcement, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah. I was looking for you, and I was calling in every favor I could to try and figure out where he was at.
Yeah, learn my lesson. So you were going airport to airport, federalizing all private security, making, mom and pop security force the TSA. So then what happened that kind of became the downfall of?
Well, that just continued, and so I was working a lot. I mean, a lot, and I mean, there was, and then for a while, I had a job so I was actually working in D.C. So I had an apartment in Washington D.C. Well, in Alexandria, and and I was working in Pentagon City and traveling around the country, and uh, so yeah, your mother and I's relationship was just non-existent because I was gone all the time, um, and that led to our divorce. Um, but for me, there's you know, my family was a very big thing for me, and being a husband and a father and uh, all those things were really really super important. And then when my marriage fell apart, I was like, everything went away, and I felt so betrayed, and that sense of betrayal was very very widespread because there's when you're in, this now, that there's when once you become an adult, your social circle shrinks.
A lot.
um yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're like a teenager, even a young adult, and you've got like all these friends. But then you get and marriage is really when it starts to narrow, um, because your life starts to center around your family, and so anyway, that that divorce really really sent me into a very dark place, and I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't know that I had, I mean, I kind of knew that I had PTSD, um but I was just like, well, whatever. I mean, there's uh all of the symptoms associated with PTSD are good if you're either a warfighter or you're working in the security
Yeah,
business.
if you thrive off of it, that's I I was telling somebody about the amount of stress and anxiety that I've had this last week, and they're like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, it's fueling me."
Yeah, yeah. There's it's so but anyway, there's so and then I just kind of went into a my 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 psychiatrist calls it a psychotic break, and I just wasn't thinking. It's not that I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking soundly. I didn't have um, the ability to control my thoughts. So I quit my job. I left my house. Just said, "Hey, let the bank come take it." Got rid of my car. Moved into a van down by the river. Um,
So this story is much more funny from my side because I had just started dating Haley and I was just out of my divorce. So I was living in your basement. And I am out getting a burger with Haley and you give me a call on Father's Day. And I'm looking at my phone like, "Oh, cool, Dad's calling me. It's Father's Day. Maybe he wants to hang out tonight." So I pick up and you say, "All right, buddy, I've made some decisions and they impact you, so we need to have a conversation." And then I came home and that's when you were like, "Yeah, I'm the bank's going to take everything back. I'm done. I'm going to go move down in a van by the river." And I was like, "So I'm going to be homeless too? Do I need a place to live?"
Yeah, and that's a really good example of I was in such a space that I couldn't see anyone else's um, uh, problems because I was so overwhelmed by my own,
Yeah.
and I was just trying to uh, well either I was trying to survive. There's
Yeah.
I was going through many of the same things that you mentioned earlier. I was having suicidal thoughts. I was um, uh, and there was just a lot of things at that same time. So I got divorced. They were updating my security clearance at work, and uh, there's anyway. So I had a lot of stress, and and I I I snapped. That's the easiest way to describe it. I just snapped, and there's and later I found out that not only did I have PTSD, but I had bipolar disorder, and that those conditions ruled me for shoot almost a decade, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a long, long time. Um,
Because how
because
long
I
had it been when I visited you in, what was it, 2019? How long had it been since you had moved from Boise at that point? Because I don't think that we had seen each other in almost like 6 years.
Yeah, yeah. So I left Boise in I believe it was 2012, um, and and again I was uh, I had a trailer, but I wasn't working and I wasn't thinking right. So I go to Illinois and I spent some time with my dad and my sister, and then I'm like, oh, okay. And I sold the trailer that I was living in, and I'd already sold the van that I was living in, so I rented a U-Haul, went to Florida, um, bought a pickup truck in Florida, lived with my brother for a little while. Um, that anyway, so all that happened. So I left from Idaho. I was in Illinois for a little while. I was in Florida for a little while. I drove that truck all the way across the country to California. I was in California for a little while. While I was in California, I went to truck driving school and I got a job driving long haul trucks. Um, But again, all this stuff is still going on. It was just a job, and I got in a fight with the guy who was my trainer, and I ended up on the side of the road in I think Bowling Green, Kentucky, or something like
I
that.
remember it was in the South. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was on a bus. One of the poems that I've got a poem called Greyhound from Kentucky, or Greyhound from Chicago. I was on a Greyhound bus from Chicago, and I was heading back to California, and I had a friend who they're like, hey, you know, you're going through Denver. Why don't you stop and spend a couple weeks with us? Um, so I did, and I just never left. I never left Colorado. But but again, I mean, I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have a job, and I ended up homeless on the streets of Boulder and Longmont. I was there's and while I was homeless, a a uh, a VA guy kind of found me living on the street, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come out to the vet center?" So I go out to the vet center, and um, so I started seeing a therapist at the vet center. I started getting medication for my head problems. Um, that guy was part of the VA's homeless program, so he got me a housing voucher, and I got into an apartment, and that was kind of the uh, the beginning of what eventually was a recovery for me. But even that, I mean, it took a very long time for me to find the right medications, and I wasn't helping that at all because I was drinking a lot and smoking a lot of weed, um, and uh, anyway, so there's all that together ended up where like now I'm in the VA's vocational rehab program. They call it something different, but it's VRE. That's what it is, vocational rehab. And that's how I'm going to school. The VA is paying for my school. Um, and I'm still living in an apartment. And, I live in a great apartment in downtown Boulder.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't say this because Elon Musk might be listening, but, the government still pays part of my rent.
Let's
Um,
let after this story, we can very clearly see that these are tax dollars being used for a good reason that actually helped homeless veterans. So for all of you people that are like, "Oh, we should be doing more to help homeless veterans,"
yeah,
it's
that's
a good example.
yeah, it really is. I mean, there's the VA has, and like even in my undergrad, I was uh, I was still struggling a lot with symptoms, and so like I would get all A's on my classes in one term, and the very next term I would fail everything, just fail everything. And I was sure that the VA was going to say, well, hey, obviously school's not for you. Um, let's do something else. But they every time it happened, they were like, okay, well, you can if you want, you can take the classes over again, and that happened. That happened several times while I was going through undergrad. It took me a long time to get my undergraduate degree, but but by the time I was finished with undergrad, uh, I had good meds. And um, I was in a much better headspace. A lot of the bitterness that was controlling me because I couldn't even start working on those things. I couldn't even think about trying to um, reconcile with my past when I was still in this
Dealing with your
tumultuous
now.
present. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all I was thinking of was my here and now, and how do I make it through the day, and how do I um, uh, you know, uh, again, people often think of mania when they talk about bipolar disorder. They're like, oh, somebody's acting, they've got all this energy. They're like, oh, he's bipolar, he's got that. But the normal state for somebody with bipolar disorder is depressed.
Yeah, it's
There's
that
so
bottom part of the bobby pin.
yeah. So there's a the normal condition for a person with bipolar is chronic depression. You're always down, and then occasionally you have these like really bizarre. Uh,
Oh, this is what normal people feel like?
yeah, yeah,
I think that that's one of the one of the things that I do respect a lot out of coming out of the Christian faith. And one of the things that is a message that's really strong within the Christian faith is it really does understand redemption. Um,
yeah,
and and I think that that's one of the failures in non-theistic society is an inability to realize that people can be redeemed. Um, we had a really interesting situation that came into the shop a couple years ago, and it was during the George Floyd protests that were going on, and there was a lot of like Blue Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter protests that were happening all across the country. And, as a barbershop in the Treasure Valley, which is a very progressive area of a very conservative state, we get crazy mixed views from extremes on either side. And we follow some of our clients on social media and see what's going on in their lives, and it's nice because then whenever they're coming in, we know what's going on. We can talk about life and just be friends. And during these protests, we had one client who had taken a bunch of pictures, and we saw a different client who had so many like SS bolts and iron crosses and swastikas and very, very hateful iconography on his motorcycle cut that he was there with his motorcycle group. And they were there backing the blue because their opinion was cops hate black people as much as we do. And we found that out through Instagram. And we're like, oh, that sucks. That guy was kind of cool, and now we know a lot more about him. So we had a conversation of, how much do I believe in free speech? And for me, I as much as I do not agree with those values and think that they can rot in the deepest circles of hell, I think that there is space in America for everyone to have any shitty view that they want to have, as long as you don't spew your filth towards me personally, and as long as you're not doing anything to actively impose your will or harm somebody else that's not a part of your community. That's the idea of democracy and us all being in the same space. On the same side, no Nazi shit in my shop, period. So I had a conversation with the barber, and I was like, look, whatever you do, I'm going to back 100%. You don't want a Nazi piece of shit coming into the shop? I'm good with that. Uh, he also comes in and pays you $75 a week, so that's $300 a month. That's a good amount of money, man. And we are capitalists. So, do you want to take Nazi money? Because I'll take money out of a Nazi's wallet. I'd rather it come to me than another Nazi. So we had that conversation and ultimately made the decision that it would be really awkward because the one caveat that I said where he's allowed to come in is I get to ask him why. Like, I know now, and I have a loud mouth, and I like to talk, and I really like to have conversations. And I have never had that conversation, and that's a conversation that I would be fascinated to have. If he's comfortable with me asking him why, I'm fine with him coming into the shop as long as he has a respectful answer to that. So he didn't have anything happen. So fast forward about 2 years, and he is fighting, or the other barber winds up seeing him out at Best Buy, and dude looks haggard, absolutely just defeated. And they make eye contact, and they wind up talking, and apparently the guy had gone through crazy horrible situation. He had divorced his wife. His wife was really pressuring him to stay with that motorcycle club. And his dad got sick, and his dad's health was more important than his motorcycle club. So he stopped being around all this hateful messaging and just kind of ideology. and he was trying to really, really get away from it as much as he possibly could. So he found an opportunity to volunteer and fight in Ukraine. And this is a guy who, Air Force veteran, like had spent a couple of years, had served overseas, has done some stuff. And then he wanted to use his skill set fighting what he thought were actual Nazis, and people who were trying to put their fascist views into strong arming and taking away from other people. So he went and fought the front lines of Ukraine for a year. And the when he came back, he had such a very different ideology than when he had left. And he kind of understood people, I think, a little bit better. So the conversation changed. And I was like, do you want him to come back into the shop? And he didn't really know what to think about that. And he had asked me what I thought. And I said, I think that people on my side of the aisle are really, really good at just writing people off. And that's really unfortunate, because I think that it speaks more volume if you can actually give somebody a second chance. If you can show somebody that, hey, yeah, this guy sucked, he doesn't anymore, and we want to have faith in this person that they actually are who they say they are. Who does that speak more volume to? The fact that he changed, or the fact that we were willing to accept his change? And that is one of the things about like the Christian faith and redemption that I think is really, really interesting, and does offer a lot of value to anyone that is a part of that community.
Yeah, that kind of segues into the current event I was gonna talk about.
Yeah, so you were mentioning something about the changing of the names of bases, of military bases, I wasn't aware of this. So there's a lot of military bases that are named after Confederate generals and soldiers.
Yeah, and I've been in a lot of these bases. You've been to some of them. You've been to what used to be Fort Benning. In 2023 was changed to Fort Moore,
Okay.
and that's because Benning's a Confederate general, and probably the most controversial one of those name changes was Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is a storied installation.
Yeah.
So many people have, have done just to have built military experiences, lives off of Fort Bragg. So many, I mean, they're storied in World War II, storied in Vietnam, storied during the Global War on Terror. So many people have deployed out of it, and they changed it to Fort Liberty. And there really wasn't a more for lack of a better term, like touchy feely.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm like,
let's
that's kind of a silly name.
yeah, it's and this is the thing. So they changed Fort Bragg in 2023 to Fort Liberty, and then just this past week, the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, signed a directive ordering the Army to change the name back to Fort Bragg. But here's the thing, and this gets to exactly what you were talking about. They changed it back to Fort Bragg, they didn't change it back to being named after Braxton Bragg, who was the Confederate general that it was originally named after.
Okay.
They changed it to honor a PFC, a private first class named Roland Bragg,
Okay.
who fought in the Battle of Bulge during World War II and won a Silver Star. Interesting story. He was a mechanic in
PFC?
in the
Is
17th
who it
Airborne
was named
Division.
after?
Say again?
A PFC is who's it's named after?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it started being, it was named by a Confederate general, and now it's named after
A
an
rookie.
American, yeah, an American private first class who was a mechanic in the 17th Airborne Division. Um, and there was a guy in his unit that was wounded, so he stole an enemy ambulance. He stole a German ambulance, put the guy in the German ambulance, um, and drove through a hail of gunfire to get the guy to a hospital in Belgium. Um, but there, so great. I mean, I couldn't be happier that this is that there's a in the first place. It's a
That's a
Joe.
story
I
of
mean,
heroism.
yeah, by a normal, everyday,
Yeah.
run of the mill soldier who did something amazing, and now he's got an entire base named after him. And the
Is
only
he still
reason that he got
alive?
it named after him is because he's got a last name that allowed them to turn it back to Bragg, because there has been just so much turmoil in uh, in uh, in the active duty military, but particularly in the veteran community, people who have history with Fort Bragg, have history at Fort Benning, have history in some of these other places, and they're like, wait a minute, uh, there's they had a year long um, uh, literal DEI hug where they were like, oh well, let's figure out how can we rename these bases specifically um, uh, after people that we could use to like tell the diversity story. So it was a very very contrived, very everything that is negative about about the DEI initiative was the motivation for this particular DEI initiative. And they didn't talk to anybody. They just went into this little secret group, and then they came out and they renamed 9 bases, all after different people, and it was specifically because they wanted to rename all the bases that were named honoring Confederate soldiers of any kind, mostly Confederate generals.
Now, I personally, as like, obviously I don't have military experience other than being an army brat and being kind of surrounded in the culture and raised in it. I can't understand giving somebody a consolation trophy that's a loser. I don't understand that. And my mentality, and I think I've told you this, is like, if the idea is, yeah, we want to name the fort after him because we want him to be underneath our boot for the rest of history and we're going to walk all over him, yeah, we're winners. That's a great way of looking at it. But that's not what it is. It's, these things are named after people who were very good at the skill set that they had, and that's one of the things that people sometimes fail to acknowledge. Like, I might not necessarily like some of the things that Trump is doing, but I was telling Haley the other night, his media team is amazing. And after looking at the White House social media and for the last administration and this administration, and how much more communicative this administration is on whitehouse.gov than the last one, like, I don't have to like the guy to recognize where he's good at something. And I can understand, if you have certain military skill sets, accolades, whatever, and there's going to be a base named after some of those mentalities. I get it, unless you're a loser and we beat you. And the Confederates were lost. They wanted to secede from the nation. They lost, and I don't think that we should have trophies sitting around for them. The interesting thing about this private first class is, did they have to actively seek out, like, okay, how many people in the history of the military have the last name Bragg? How many of those people have a really interesting story?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's exactly what it was. Because and the Secretary of Defense has made it pretty clear that he wants to rename what's now called Fort Moore back to Fort Benning.
but they need to find a
Um,
good Benning.
yeah, I don't know how they're going to do it, because one of the things that Congress did under the previous Congress is they made it unlawful to name federal installations after uh, people who served in the Confederacy, and you know your sentiment is dead on, because I mean it's like, why on earth would you name, and Bragg is a great example, because he not only was he a Confederate general, he was a horrible Confederate general. He got relieved of command, killed a bunch of people, lost a bunch of battles.
So
He
he
was
shouldn't have had something named after him.
Yeah, even if it wasn't the fact that he was a Confederate, he was just a bad general.
Okay.
So how it happened, I don't know. That's an interesting conversation, but yeah, we definitely would. When I say we, I'm one of the people that I was like, man, and the reason I was is it was specifically done in a nasty way to say that anybody who likes these old names is a racist. Anybody who likes the fact that Fort Benning is called Fort Benning is just a denier of the influence that slavery had on the United States, and that's just not the case.
And I don't think
There's
that that's the culture that exists there for, for people who have been there. Like I've been to Camp Merrill, I've been to Fort Benning, I've been to a bunch of places in the South. Like you took me vertical rappelling down Stone Mountain, which has had a lot of protests because of the racist history of it. But you bringing your son to go do vertical rappelling with a bunch of rangers had nothing to do with teaching me the ideology of hate. It was us going out to the mountains and enjoying this space. So like the idea that you have cultures of people that are just like, yeah, that guy Bragg, he was awesome. I just don't think that that's a realistic expectation of what's happening.
Yeah, and the South is one of the places in the United States that still has um, the regional affinity that the United States began with. We people nowadays, they think of us as one country. We're the United States of America, and we'll even say things like, "Oh, well, it's American values," or "It's the American way of life." But if there's
There's like
and
seven
you've been
different
able to see this,
Americas.
yeah, there are. Man, I'm telling you, America isn't the same from coast to coast, from north to south,
Yeah.
east to west. There are very different places, and people are very very different. But we don't see ourselves that way. What we do is we take what we believe is America, and we extrapolate that, and just assume that people in New England believe the same thing as people in California, which is completely not the case. Um, and
Um,
it's
Oh,
Go
so
ahead.
I was gonna make a point because I mean, we're kind of talking about DEI and we're talking about American values. And did you get a chance to see the halftime show for the Super Bowl at all?
No, what I did is
You
I
got a
had my
summary
AI
from?
watch the Super Bowl and send me updates. I was getting text messages from my AI, tell me what was going on. But yeah, so I had it was on Sunday, and I had some major writing projects that I had to get through. So I was writing and writing and writing,
Okay.
but I was on my phone. I was getting text messages from my AI giving me score updates, telling me
So
what was going on in the game.
so I was talking to one of my clients, and I he's a very nice guy, but he does not pay attention to anything going on around the world. He's like, okay, there's I like football, and after football there's basketball, and after basketball there's summertime. And that's always been our conversations. They are about yay high in depth, which is fine. I'm perfectly fine if people enjoy being happy, because that's one of those things that I'm just incapable of doing. And I had asked him about the halftime show, and he's like, "Oh, you mean that thing that like 90% of the people watching the Super Bowl didn't want to see?" I was like, "Actually, well, let's hypothetically say I'm in that 10%." I definitely recommend, when we're done, I'll send you a link, and watching the full 13 minutes is an amazing performance. Sam Jackson is dressed up as Uncle Sam Jackson, and it's amazing. It's really, really good. And I'm not the biggest Kendrick Lamar fan. I've never really been huge into the East Coast, West Coast hip hop battles, and I didn't care whatsoever about the Kendrick and Drake drama that was going on last year. I've since looked into it and like, wow, that's a story. But I was telling him I do this every year. I don't watch football. I really don't like what I consider to be like modern day gladiatorial combat and just like athleticism for the sake of athleticism. It just doesn't resonate with me. But I do watch the halftime show every year. And I think that watching the halftime show out of context is a really interesting way to kind of get a snapshot of America in a current moment. And I don't think there could have been a better snapshot of American values in a halftime show, all being kind of wrapped up into one thing. So, like, first off, you have an American hip hop artist who's currently having a feud with a Canadian hip hop artist. So there's the America Canada aspect of it. On top of that, you have Donald Trump in the audience, which that's a big deal for the first time in history, as is Taylor Swift. I I'm in the middle of this text conversation with this group of organizers for that protest that I went to last week, and I was like, "Hey, you guys, we're talking too much, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be an inevitable slap fight between Taylor Swift and POTUS 47, and I don't want to miss it." And so the way that it comes out is Uncle Sam Jackson basically acts as a moderator. And then Kendrick comes out, and all of these people pop up out of a car, and they're dressed in red, white, and blue. And there's so much subtlety in the design of the entire performance, to the extent that there's a triangle, circle, X square on the way that people are arranged, and that is a nod to the Sony PlayStation controller, because Drake is signed to Sony's music label. So there's like little subtleties there. But he also openly talks shit about the president who's in the room with him. And then there are a lot of dance sequences where you see red, white, and blue kind of running in between each other, high fiving each other. And the last main component of it is there's not a single white person in the entire performance. And in the time after, I've heard a lot of complaints of like, well, why aren't there white people? From white people that voted for the guy to get rid of the laws that would maybe make somebody who's excluded to be included. And there's a certain irony in that. But I was saying that how amazing is it that you can have somebody literally be in the room with the president, throw shade at the president, and then continue to do a halftime show for the entire country to be entertained. If you were to do anything like that in any other country, you're not coming out with another record.
Yeah, yeah. There's and it's um, and there's there because before that we were talking about the Civil War. It's kind of interesting. I think that there's one of the things that is fascinating about the the way that the Civil War impacted the U.S. afterwards is like, so Abraham Lincoln's plan for uh, for incorporating the Confederate States into the Union. So if he had lived, his plan was called the 10 Plan, and basically 10% of the registered voters in the former states of the Confederacy would have to sign an oath of allegiance to the United States. So Lincoln was like, oh, we're going to let these people back in, even if 90% of them still wish that they had won the war. Even if 90%, and that's, that is, I think, a really, a testament to Lincoln's understanding of the Union. The Union has never been about, trying to force people to believe one way or another. But the Civil War was about behavior. It was about the behavior of chattel slavery in the states of the South, and he thought that was a war worth fighting, and the Confederates thought that was a war worth fighting. So we fought a war over slavery, but other than and yeah, so one of the other things that they had to do is they had to ratify the 13th Amendment under Lincoln's plan, and so he wasn't even making them ratify all the Civil War amendments. He was only, of the 3 Civil War amendments, he only wanted them to ratify one. And he was going to let these folks come back into the Union. Now, it didn't end up working out that way because in 1867, the Republicans won big in the congressional races, and the reason they won big is because the southern states were all Democratic states at the time, and they weren't part of the election because they weren't allowed back in the Union. So since the states of the Confederacy weren't allowed to vote in that election, the Republicans had these massive majorities, and they switched that. So they said that 50% of the people had to sign an oath of allegiance. Which, by the way, that's where the Pledge of Allegiance came from. We didn't have a Pledge of Allegiance, but the whole idea of having a Pledge of Allegiance was that 50% of the people that lived in 50% of the white people that lived in the South had to sign an oath of allegiance to the Union in order for those states to come back in.
So the Pledge of Allegiance was a propaganda initiative from the government to get people to understand on a daily basis this is what you're pledging to.
Now that's not the
I wouldn't like, propaganda might not necessarily be the right term, but it is a very specific mindset of like, you have to agree to this. You need to drill this into your head, and you need to understand this.
Yeah, the lyrics of the current Pledge of Allegiance, that might not be their history. But the idea of having an oath of allegiance to the Union, because again, I mean, during the Revolutionary War, there were loyalists living in the United States. It wasn't a unanimous United States of America fighting against the Crown. It was a politically factious United States fighting against the Crown. With people, states that didn't even like each other, states that would just as soon be a war between themselves. But they were fighting as part of a. And it's interesting that the initial Constitution that we were fighting that Revolutionary War over was the Articles of Confederation. So we were a confederation of states before we became a United States, and there's a big difference there. So when the Southern states wanted to secede, what they did is they went back to the same mode of government that existed before our present Constitution. So the Confederate States of America were operating under a very weak central government and very powerful state governments, um, uh, which just shows that the divisions that separated us during the time of the Revolutionary War still existed at the time of the Civil War, because the very first thing we did is we're like, oh man, well the problem was we created a strong federal government, and if we would have never created a strong federal government, then we wouldn't be having this war about slavery, because if a state wanted to have slaves, that would be up to that state, and there would be no role for preventing it at the federal level. So, but that argument wasn't unique to the time of the Confederacy. It existed before our Union did. That's why we originally had Articles of Confederation with a weak central government that couldn't even raise taxes.
I grabbed something over here because it's always fun listening to you talk about history, because one of the things that I was telling somebody in the shop, I I get complimented because I will say that I'm a decent conversationalist. I think that if you're a decent barber, you're going to eventually become a good conversationalist. And I've always been somebody that kind of pays attention to current events and current politics and the way that I feel with the current things that are going on. And since the 20th, the conversations have really been like, I don't have the bandwidth to listen to any of this. And I've had to explain to a couple of people that I'm in a fortunate position because my bandwidth allows me to listen to a lot of news, and I'm not really emotionally impacted by it in the way that a lot of my friends are. But I was telling somebody it's hard having my dad be my podcast co-host because he is so fucking intelligent. So my bandwidth is literally so that way I can maybe hopefully keep up with him. And the as you're talking about this stuff, I'm literally looking down at my bookshelf at something you gave me like 15 years ago, and you're like, Chris, I'm gonna give you something that's really important. Here's a pocket constitution. And, it was one of those gifts that I never really understood what you were trying to tell me when you gave me what this was. And I think that those are the best gifts, like you really don't understand it. It sits on a shelf somewhere, and then one day it clicks what it is that they're giving you: history, information, stories, the experiences of the past that you can take into the future with you. And yeah, I'm always fascinated hearing about this stuff because there's so much about U.S. history that I've never known. Like Haley and we just watched this show on Netflix the other day, and fascinating show. It's called American Primeval, and it's set in this area because it's a Wyoming, Utah area, and it's probably one of the best depictions of the Shoshone people I have ever seen. It is fantastic depiction of the way that they lived as a nation and the way that they warred as a nation, and it is a brutal mini series. But I'm watching the trailer by myself, and there's a point in the trailer where they're like, "Oh no, Brigham Young's men are coming." And I'm like, the Mormons are coming? Okay. Who cares? Uh, so Haley grew up in the church. She was the youngest of eight. Grew up in very Mormon Wyoming. Her first marriage, she was married in the Salt Lake Temple. And I think this is kind of funny. And I was like, hey, you gotta see this. There's a show that they're making like, oh, Brigham Young's coming. And as she's watching the trailer, she's like, holy hell, the church doesn't like this story getting out there. They made a show about this. Wait, this is something that happened? So we looked up, and there's this entire part of US history called the Utah Wars. And when the Mormons were coming to settle Utah, they went into war with the US Army. And so the show is about this time that the church has already confirmed. And like there's a fictional story set around a historical event. That's the show. And the show's amazing. I definitely recommend it to anyone. But the Mormons were coming to Utah and they were trying to create a nation state for themselves. And in that effort, the Mormon militia dressed up as Shoshone people and attacked and killed an entire encampment of Mormons. And they basically told the US Army, the natives are killing our people. You need to go after the natives. So that way they would get the army to do their work for them. And then when the army finds out that it was actually the Mormons that had done this, it created a war between the Mormons and the U.S. Army. And, you know, living in Idaho, going to Utah and Wyoming pretty regularly, like there's kind of an idea of Mormons. That's not it whatsoever. But I'm reading in this, and it's just absolutely fascinating to see kind of the lessons that you can learn from history. And that's actually one of the next books that I'm going to be reading will be about Jim Bridger, the mountain man that the Bridger Tetons were named after. Because just the simple way that he's depicted in this show is enough that I'm fascinated by this person that I want to start learning more about him and the ways of running a fort. And he was an individual who didn't really care what the US government said about who it is that he could or could not do business with. The US government didn't want him doing business with the natives, but he had natives that came through and he was going to do business with whom he pleased. And I think that that's kind of an interesting value that a lot of people are missing with all the DEI stuff. Because do I agree with it? Yes and no. Like I do think that there's protections that still need to exist for some people because I do still think racism is inherent. But at the end of the day, that's not nothing is getting changed in my world. In the world of private business, I can do whatever I want. I can hire who I want, how I want, and the government isn't going to tell me who it is that I can and cannot do business with. And I think that that's kind of an interesting double-edged sword because for me, yeah, I'm going to go after the best person. I don't care who it is. And if the government tells me that I'm not allowed to like gay people, no, I don't care. I'm going to go hire gay people because it doesn't bother me as an individual. But at the same time, in Kendrick Lamar's experience, if you want to celebrate your community and you want to promote your community, hire in your community. That makes sense. You shouldn't have the government saying that you should or should not do any one thing specifically. So I can understand and not necessarily back, but I can really, really get to about 55% of like, yeah, I get it. And I understand why a lot of these practices need to go away because inherently they can force a different kind of racism because now you're not giving opportunities to people who should get opportunities just because they're not ticking a box.
Yeah, there's. I think a good example is uh, the current. So President Trump's Secretary of the Treasury uh, is the first openly gay man to serve as the Treasury Secretary. Um, and but I don't think anybody thinks that Donald Trump was like, oh well, let me go find some gay guy,
No,
and so that I can put him into my cabinet.
certainly
He
not my
wasn't trying to
opinion.
make. Yeah, he wasn't trying to put anybody in there except for the best qualified person.
And
And
isn't
the
his chief of
best,
staff the first female chief of staff?
yeah, there's so and look, Pete Hegseth is a millennial. Uh um uh uh um Anyway, so the notion that Trump is anti any particular people group in the United States is just, it's just not real. I mean,
Yeah. And I do
there's
think that if you look at the stage in at was it Mar-a-Lago that he did the acceptance speech, or was it just outside of Mar-a-Lago,
I
at the
think it was
convention center?
at Mar-a-Lago, I think.
Um, the convention or the acceptance speech back in November when he won, not when he was actually inaugurated.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't remember that where he
Yeah, it was at
was.
like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was staying up for the whole night because I'm like I'm already committed. I'm just gonna watch it anyways. It's a pretty diverse group of people that was on stage,
Oh
and
yeah, it's like
yeah,
the Village People played at the inauguration. I mean, there's yeah. So
I have my own thoughts of that.
I,
That's like the bands that go and do the fair circuit. Like Nelly came to Boise, Idaho to play the Idaho State Fair. It's like, huh, it's getting hot in her, said not your career. And it's like the Village People are probably like all hanging out at home and they're like, wait, we're getting offered to do what? Yeah, we'll totally do that.
Now, here's an interesting thing about the Village People and their persona. Uh, so, you know, the Village People is from Greenwich Village, which
Yeah.
was a gay community in New York, is still a gay community in New York City, and it's where the Stonewall Inn riots
Yeah.
occurred in 1969. Now, so the whole phrase coming out of the closet, where that phrase came from was the gay community in New York City um, was a very diverse group, and there were lots of people who were working on Wall Street uh, during the day, but then they were going to gay bars at night. But to be found out as a gay person could mean the end of your job.
Yeah.
There's so if at the time it was just so one of the things that like uh the cops in New York, so it was kind of a um there was a at the time there was a lot of corruption in the NYPD for the mafia. So the mafia were really running a lot of the bars, and all of the gay bars in New York were run by the mafia. And the mafia would give those bars up for a raid so that the police department would be able to show, see, we're really working on trying to solve crime by raiding all these nightclubs. But the only nightclubs they were raiding were gay bars in New York, and the gay folks couldn't complain, because if they complained, they'd be like, okay, well, next time we raid, we're going to put your face in the paper. We're going to publish your face and
Yeah.
your name in the paper. So anyway, so to avoid being outed, to avoid being having their identity discovered, um, gay people started wearing outlandish costumes when they'd go to these bars. So you would go to a gay bar, there would be people dressed up in all kinds of regalia, just really, really outlandish costumes. And that was known as coming out of the closet, because you would take these clothes and wear them as a disguise to protect your identity. So the persona of the Village People was really communicating that the only way that these people can go out is to dress up as an Indian and as a construction worker and as a motorcycle guy. But the reason people were dressing
So
up
that
like
way they
that
wouldn't
is
be recognized in the newspaper if their face was put out there.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
I've always looked at the again. I think I may have said this before, but I think that the Pride movement, the gay Pride movement. Now I distinguish the gay Pride movement from the current equity flag movement, because the flag changed, and when the flag changed, literally everything in that political movement changed. So I've got no respect for the equity flag movement. I think they're a socialist anarchy group, and there's some history to that. But the gay pride movement is unquestionably one of the most successful nonviolent political movements that has ever existed in the United States, and they won that Obergefell decision, which secured the right for people to marry, whether they're same sex or not. They won that decision because they changed people's minds.
Yeah.
And the law came afterwards, because everybody was like, "Oh, hang on." They were like, "Hey, all we want is to be able to do the same things that everybody else does, and we think we should be allowed to do that." And the Mormons were on board with it. The Catholics were on board. Everybody was like, "Yeah, that makes sense. We don't want." But the thing is they were like, "Well, we don't want a priest to have to marry a gay person, but we think that a gay person should be able to get married." But what happened when they gave up their flag? They literally gave up their flag to this equity flag movement, and now it's the exact opposite.
Let me make sure that because I do know that the original pride flag had teal and fuchsia on it, and every single one of there was 8 colors, and they'd removed 2 because of if I recall, there was actually a manufacturing issue with being able to source the materials. So there's very few of those original flags in, but then when they moved to the 6 colors, what are you talking about? Because that's not something that I'm very familiar with as far as how it's changed from gay pride to the equity movement. I have seen in the communities that I'm part of the explosion of 1,000 different flags. And apparently I have a flag because I identify as pan. And I never needed a flag. I really don't care. But I have one. I don't really understand that part of it where everyone needs to have a flag for every little aspect of everything. So what is it that you're talking about with the change from the pride flag to the equity flag movement?
Okay, so the pride flag movement started, it started with the Stonewall riots. And almost immediately, like 3 days after the riots ended, there was an organization in New York called the Gay Liberation Front. And the Gay Liberation Front purported to, they told the gay community in New York, "Hey, we're going to fight for your rights. But what they really were, they didn't care who they were fighting for. They just wanted to fight. So they were a socialist anarchy group. And they were just trying to start fights all over town. And after a few months of this, the gay community were like, "No, we're not into it." So they started a completely different group called the Gay Action Alliance. And the Gay Action Alliance was a legit social rights movement organization. They believed in nonviolent protests, and and they were tremendously affected.
And
Literally,
that's probably more in line with like the message of Harvey Milk in San Francisco.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. So within a year of the Stonewall riots, all the Gay Liberation Front did was start more riots. They were just trying to create violence anywhere they could because, again, they were an anarchy group. But the Gay Action Alliance started. They did these. I think they called them SWATs. I think is what they were calling them. I don't know why. But what they would do is
Zaps.
a councilman. What is it?
It's Zaps. I'm looking on the Wikipedia of this because I'd never heard of this before. And yeah, there were similar tactics such as Zaps.
Yeah. So what they do is a politician would be like, opening up a new fire station, and they would show up and protest. And then when they would show up and protest, they would protest in their coming out of the closet garb.
Yep.
So all these people dressed really, really extravagantly and in drag and all kinds of different
Throwing
costumes.
it in their face.
Exactly.
Ah.
So what they won through those nonviolent civil rights protests is on the 1 year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, New York City permitted their first Pride parade. So and the Gay Action Alliance didn't come into being until December of 1969. So between December of 1969 and August of 1970, the Gay Action Alliance secured the permit that allowed them to legally have a parade in order to advocate for their cause. And they won that by doing those zaps, by exercising nonviolent political influence on politicians, so then that became very successful. That model became very successful, and the gay pride movement started in Chicago, it started in LA, it started in San Francisco, but it was all offshoots of the Gay Action Alliance and their support of the gay community after the Stonewall riots in New York. So then 10 years later, no, I think it was 1974, so it wasn't quite 10 years later, but Harvey Milk wanted to have a gay pride parade in San Francisco, and he commissioned an art project. So the first gay pride flag was an art project for a pride parade in San Francisco. And the artist, I can't remember her name, but the artist that did it was a textile artist that made things. So the original flag had 8 colors, and the stripes were kind of like
sewn together. It was like strips that were all just sewn together.
And they had bunting, so it wasn't like a flat flag. It had depth to it. So it was a piece of art, is what it was. So, but when they unfurled that flag in San Francisco, like literally instantly, everybody was like, "That stands for me."
Yeah.
Everybody they fell in line behind that flag, and it was probably like this. It was this real figurative sense of identity for the gay pride movement at the beginning of the mid 1970s. So they wanted to have those same flags in New York and Chicago and L.A. and Boston and San Francisco. They wanted to have that flag, but they ran into the logistics problem that you're talking about, because those 2 colors were super, super expensive. The artist didn't care that they were expensive because it was a one-off deal.
Yeah.
But when they were going to try and manufacture T-shirts and little flags that you can wave on the side of the road for the parade, it just wasn't economically viable. So they wanted to take 2 colors, the teal and the pink, off of those flags because those were driving up the cost. And that was, in the entire history of the Pride movement, it was the biggest controversy that nearly destroyed the whole movement, because because the artist that did it was like, no, this flag is the flag that I made, and if you want to use it, it's got to be this way. And eventually they went to they got a compromise, and the compromise was the artist agreed to allow them to make the flag with six colors. But it was a huge deal. It wasn't a small thing. Changing the flag was a big deal. But it became I mean now you see a rainbow flag and you think of gay. Yeah, that's what you when you see
Yeah, you
a
don't think
rainbow
prism
flag.
of light.
That's exactly right. You don't think prism of light. You don't think the rainbow after Noah's flood. You don't think anything of that. The
Again,
entire
Elon and the
not
hand
just
gestures.
say again.
Again, Elon and the hand gestures.
Oh yes, there's
He's ruined it.
yeah, it's terrible. But I'll try and keep my hands down. But there, but
Sitting on my hands. ADHD.
it became one of the most awe-inspiring figures of unification for the gay rights movement, not only in the United States but around the world, but definitely in the United States. Everything about rainbow changed with that flag, and that flag represented the movement that kind of morphed a little bit
That
because
was
they
more of
quit
the
calling themselves
anarcho,
the
we're
pride.
here, you better deal with it.
Yeah, that's what it was. But then when they really thought that they were getting close to securing the right to marry, they kind of renamed themselves the Marriage Equality Movement, um, and they did that so that they could focus on the one thing that they wanted to win. They wanted to win the right um, to marry, and and then they did. They and that marriage equality movement was the changing of the name and naming it that in that fashion was very successful because again the Mormons remembered their own fight for polygamy, which again you think what you want about polygamy, but
If it's
it was a
consenting adults, it's consenting adults.
yeah, and they were like, man, we've got marriage practices that the government didn't like, and the government stopped us from marrying the way that we wanted to. We don't want these people to have to go through the same thing that we went through. And then Catholics started looking. They were like, hey, there's a we there was the Catholic rite of marriage is an interesting topic that we could get into some other time, but we'll just say that the people, not the Catholic Church, but the people who are Catholic were like, this is ridiculous. The government shouldn't be stopping these people from having loving relationships. There's it deals with the order of love, that love orders society. And one of the things that love does to order society is it creates the family unit. So the family unit that is the foundation of society is a is a is an order of society that is rooted and sourced in love. So the notion that you would try and destroy families because of difference of opinion about love was just a little too much. So all of a sudden, these people who you never thought were going to support marriage equality came in behind that movement,
And they
and they
got
were
on
like,
board,
"Okay,
yeah.
yeah, we're going to do it." But as soon as Obergefell was decided, two things happened. The first thing that happened was the Pride movement, the gay people who had been fighting so hard for so long to secure that right, were like, "Oh, we finally won. Now we can live our lives. I don't have to worry about."
The battle's
Uh,
over.
that's exactly right. They're like,
Yeah.
the battle's over. if my spouse gets sick, nobody's going to prevent me from visiting them in the hospital. Nobody's nobody's parents are going to be able to supersede my rights as their spouse,
Which is a large
and
sentiment of
make
a
it.
lot of my gay clients is they actually are not a big fan of going to the Pride festivals because they're like it's a bit much for us, and I'm just living life. That's not really my thing.
So that
And it's an interesting perspective of recognize like, yeah, the Pride movement, that is part of the gay community, but it's not the entire gay community.
So what happened, and what I talk about when I refer to the equity flag movement, is when the Pride movement was like, okay, we won, we're going to go back to our family, we won, we're happy, we got everything we wanted. We think that this country is great. This is all we really wanted, was the ability to live our lives the same way that everybody else does. So they won, and when they won, in the same way that the Gay Liberation Front tried to adopt the identity of the gay community in New York to further their socialist agenda, the equity flag movement adopted the flag. They just took it because they're like, you're not using it anymore. I'm going to take it. And they changed it. They changed the shape of the flag. They changed the standard, the very front part of the flag. They keep changing it. So like now first they added just like pink and white and blue, and then they added a brown, and then they added a purple circle, and
So I is my understanding that those are all different flags. Now, are you talking about the how it was the LGBT community and then it became the LGBTQ and then the LGBTQI and the LGBTQIA plus and then it eventually just became the Alphabet Mafia. So what you're saying is that each iteration was a new version and they were actually different versions every single time, but those of us who are kind of just allied on the outside, not part of it, we're like, oh, their flag's evolving.
yeah. So well, it goes back to the idea of gaslighting, and the principle that's behind it is critical theory. So again, in critical theory, there's three phases. There's a prefiguration, there's a figuration, which is your message, and then there's a refiguration, which is the outcome of that message. So, so what the flag is, the equity flag, is a prefiguration um, uh, 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 propaganda. So it's trying to prefigure the argument in that everybody who is a member of any one of these identity groups is a victim. And whenever you have a victim, you have to have an oppressor. And this is what again, it's an anarchist group. So what they really want is they want to sow violence and chaos against the oppressor. That's what they want to do. They want violence and chaos against the government, in particular against the government that establishes the white male patriarchy, uh, white male Christian nationalist patriarchy that is now gaslit. So that's the oppressor, and anybody who is not part of that group is now part of this other group. So it's and and to be honest, if you just remember back a few years, there was always tension within the gay community with the whole LGBTQ letter, because they were like, okay, we understand the LG and the B, we get that, all right. So that's a difference
But
of
aren't we all
sexual.
Q?
Yeah, yeah, we're all like
Yeah.
Q is just kink. So there's and it's a and again, so I have to be careful. So I'm gonna have to at least identify, because I don't want to be perceived as somebody who's just like, oh, well, God created male and female, so everybody's got to fit into that binary choice. So sexual identity. And again, this is my area of passion in
Yeah,
terms
and
of.
this is a conversation we've had. This is why I'm not like jumping in the middle, being like, "All right, Dad." And from my perspective, like I do identify as kind of this weird fluid sexuality. Like I look at it as pan, and I'm not necessarily guy or girl. Are you attractive? And that's easy for me. Yes or no. We're watching Severance right now, and frankly, the manager is one of the most attractive men on television right now. And Haley and I have been having conversations, but trying to convey to somebody like, oh yeah, I'm in a monogamous heterosexual relationship with my wife as a pansexual individual. It's like, that's kind of weird. So you're just a guy with a girl? Yeah, but I mean, there's a little bit more to it than that, I guess. So sexual identity.
Yeah, so identity development, developmental psychology, and identity development in particular is kind of like my passion. And sexual identity is part of personal identity development. And sexual identity, some people might argue that there's more than this, but I think that there are six criteria that work together to make someone's sexual identity. And interestingly enough, half of them are physical and half of them are what I call psychosocial. So, um, so a person has a genetic sex. Sometimes it's called chromosomal sex. So you're XX and you're female, XY, you're a male. Um, and that's a binary choice. There's no
There's no Z.
yeah, there is a genetic condition where there's an extra X chromosome on that side of the chromosome chain, but that's not a sexual condition. It's a very very tragic genetic
Yeah, it's a
defect
separate thing altogether.
altogether. Yeah, but so if you're XX and it's not just that your genitals are XX. Every cell in your body almost is XX. So your lungs are XX, your ears are XX, your thumbnail is XX, your eyeball is XX. Every cell in your body has that expression of binary gender, male, female. Um, then there's what's called gonadal sex. And in chromosomal sex, there's currently no treatment, and there's no treatment that's really even thought possible in with current technology to where you could manipulate every single chromosome in a person's body and change it from XX to XY or from XY to XX. So that's a binary thing that there is currently no way to change that. But when you talk about gonadal sex, so that's if you're XX or if you're XX, you've got ovaries. If you're XY, you've got testicles, and those are organs, but those organs do all kinds of things. So they create hormones. They do everything that is necessary in order to facilitate the 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 expression of the genetic sex. So testes exist to make XY people express their XY identity in a fully adult way. Now there is some there are some. It's not all binary. So there are intersex people. There are people who are born with a penises and a scrotal sac, but they're usually initially diagnosed with an undescending testes. They get to puberty and they're like, oh well, we need to drop these things down if you want to be fertile. So they'll do an X-ray or an ultrasound, and they're like, oh, you don't have testicles, you've got ovaries. So there are people who have full blown penises that work fine, but they have ovaries, and that ends up causing problems for them because they've got a gonadal sex that is working contrary to their genetic sex.
And that's when they actually feel like they're not the person that they were assigned at birth.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of people who have that. We'll get to the feeling, because that's on the other side. There's and that is an area where there are treatments, right? So you can take hormonal treatments, and you can suppress the release of male hormones, and you can encourage the release of female hormones. But what you're doing is you're artificially creating that same vexation that happens in people who naturally have a contrary gonad set. So you're there. So you've got to take those hormones for your entire life, and they're going to make your junk not work. So if you're they're likely to make your junk not work. So if you're a male and you take male suppressing hormone treatments, and you try and get female supplementation, you're likely to struggle with erectile dysfunction. You're likely to struggle with low sperm counts.
But that's because you're suppressing those parts of your body.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So there's a physical vexation that takes place. And then the last of the physical manifestations is what's called phenotypical. And phenotypical just basically means, what does it look like?
Yeah.
And this is how most people...
I'm typically male, so I am probably male.
Exactly. So, and this is what most, at least until recently, most of the sexual assignments at birth were done by an evaluation of the phenotypical sex. So you're born, one of the nurses who was doing scoring on you would look, and they were like, okay, that's a boy, because I can look, and that looks like a penis, and that looks like a scrotal sac, so I'm going to call this person a boy. Now there are lots of mistakes that are made, because some women have very large clitorises, and some women have more labia than others. So it's very easy for a pinched clitoris to enlarge and look like a small penis
as an infant,
and a scrotal sac because of the additional flesh on the labia. So there have been cases where people have been there. They get assigned male at birth, and then sometimes it's months later, sometimes it's not until they're going through puberty. They're like, no, that's not right, because my junk is, their parents or the child comes to a realization, and it's really just like a paperwork error. But it's a paperwork error that's caused by the fact that
people can make mistakes,
and the range of typical when it comes to genitalia is very, very large. So there are
very, very small.
That's exactly right. So there's
you froze and the joke didn't land.
and this is where a lot of times intersexuality comes into place, because sometimes people have both, but you don't notice it. So they have a penis and a vagina, but they don't notice the vagina because the first thing they saw was the penis. I watched a TED Talk from a woman who had two vaginas. She was born with two vaginas, and she didn't realize she had two vaginas until she was in college. So in phenotypicality, there is in that range that's where the majority of errors are made in terms of physical initial assignment at birth. So on the physical side, there's genetic sex, gonadal sex, and phenotypical sex, and those are mostly binary with some atypical expressions that exist, but those expressions are atypical and they're outside the norm. Now then on the other side, you've got these psychosocial elements of sexuality. So, and the first is genetic identity. And gender identity. Why did I say genetic? Gender identity. So, so gender identity is, do I feel like a girl or do I feel like a boy?
Okay.
Um, and in terms of identity, so now leaving from sexual identity, going into the larger scale of identity, this is where there's a term called dysmorphia. So body dysmorphia is where you have a particular part of your body that you just really, really don't like, and it causes like daily quality of life issues. I had a friend who took leave to get some cosmetic surgery. He had ears, and his ears, he thought they stuck out too far. And he would go into a room, and he had a front-facing job, so he would have meetings with stakeholders and the public, and all he could think about was his ears. It's like he was totally freaked out about his ears. He was convinced that everybody in the room was staring at his ears. So he had a hard time functioning because he had ears, that he had a body dysmorphia about his ears. So he had a surgery to pull his ears back and make them appear smaller. And that was part of his treatment for that body dysmorphia. Once he got that done, then he felt much better about himself. So when it comes to gender, it's like, oh, okay. It normally, and at least in the past, until the last 15 years, it's most common in males, and it's most commonly expressed very early on. So young boys are like, I hate my penis. I don't want a penis. I hate my penis. And they'll even try and cut their penis off because they have this body dysmorphic aversion to the genitalia that they were born with. There's but the normal expression of gender identity is, if you're XX, you feel like a girl, and if you're XY, you feel like a boy. But now you're talking about a person's internal feelings. So this isn't just psychological, or this isn't just physical. It's psychological, and even I mean, I think we all know people who are one gender, but they kind of like behave like the other gender. They've got a man with a feminine voice, a woman with a deeper voice or whatever. So they've got these. They might associate themselves, and they might take on a more masculine sense than their genetics would allow, or would prefer, or a more feminine. But it's you can't say that that's binary. There's no way that you can say that someone's feelings about something are either this way or they're either this way. And you can't say that those feelings are not real. So someone who is XX has ovaries and has very clearly has a vagina, can feel like they're a man, and they can have this discomfort within their own body because their psychological makeup caused them to feel contrary to what that physicality is. So that's gender identity. Now then, then the next genetic expression is gender expression, right? So I've got gender identity and I've got gender expression. the easiest way to remember is identity is who I feel like, and then
Expression is how I
expression
present
is
myself.
how I present myself. So, so you can have XY, have testes, have a definite penis that works and is functional. You can feel like you're a total man, but you like dressing up like a girl.
Yeah.
Um,
There's actually an Instagram account I had followed like 2 years ago, and is just a guy who wears a lot of hosiery and high heels and skirts and blouses, and most muscular looking dude I have ever seen. Was not a trans individual, was married to a woman, just that was what he was really comfortable in. And it's one of those accounts that I started following for a little bit just because it was kind of interesting to me, and then I realized like there's nothing that is there's no reason for this to be in my feed, so I'm just gonna stop following it because it's essentially somebody that was just modeling every day, and the I guess the initial thing that I was so interested in, it was like, oh, that seems pretty counterculture. But then the reason that I stopped following, I was like, well, you're just kind of boring. Like this is just your life. It's not like you're really trying to do anything, but because you're being you, and that's different for a lot of people, that's why people find you interesting. I don't necessarily find people that are being themselves all that interesting unless it's interesting to me. And just because you wear a dress, that doesn't necessarily make you interesting. But I do think that that is I didn't think the guy was faking it, and that was where I thought a lot of the interesting conversation was. Is I think that people were having this argument that he was just doing it for clicks or views or for online social media clout, and it's like, no, this guy's really well put together. I think he just likes being really well put together in the same way that I 100% match my plugs to my pants and my outfit. And I like coordinating things. He just happens to like to coordinate it with different fabrics than I do.
yeah, and this is where the notion of psychosociality comes in, because not only is it how this person feels, but it's how society tells them they should feel. So what is masculine in northern Thailand is not necessarily masculine in South Alabama. And there's northern Thailand. The ladies wear these rings on their neck,
Mm-hmm.
and they stretch their necks out, and it gets really, really tall, and that's considered attractive. So there's this social pressure on girls to have long necks. In the same way that in the United States, for many, many years, there's been pressure on on girls and women to wear dresses and high heels and long hair
And
and
look like a lady.
earrings and yeah, so you dress like a lady.
Yeah.
So it's not just how does this person want to express themselves, but how do they want to express themselves in relation to the way the society expects them to express themselves. So now, as we get farther away from the physicality, we get more and more in this spectrum, to where it's like I uh, in my day there were they called them tomboys. So there were girls who would like to wear pants and dress like the boys, um, and that was just a thing, and that is just a thing. It's just that person was pushing against the societal norms, and that's a normal expression of and they're so certainly in terms of empirical data, the normative expression for gender identity and gender expression is in accordance with the societal expectations. And if you go to a different society, then it's still going to be the same. So the people who are born XX are going to have an expression that is feminine in terms of their society. So those, but they change throughout the world. So now it's there. It's even a broader expression, and the reasons for atypical feelings are more complex, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, this is what I want to do. But then this is what I want to do because they expect me to do something else.
Well, and
So I want to do something because I want to stick it to the man, or stick it to the woman, however
now
that.
I would argue to some extent that I don't necessarily think that everybody is expressing themselves exclusively out of wanting to stick it to the man. I do think that there are a significant amount of people that are that way, and like especially growing up in the punk rock community, yeah, there's a lot of people that like to be thorns and sides. I totally get it. And one of the areas in life where I've really recognized this is the Satanic Temple. So it's kind of weird being close to this group of people, because for me, I started looking into the Church of Satan, Levian Satanism, shortly after I left the church. And you read about that, and it's 100% philosophy. And they just look at the fact that the name Satan is the adversary. We are going to be the adversary because they don't want us to exist. So we're just going to be adversarial. And it was LaVey basically doing a big fuck you to organized religion. And like that was very appealing to me in a time where I was really angry at religion. But, it's really not a good foundation of building friendships when you're all just angry. So I had been paying attention to this, and then when the Satanic Temple came about, it was really fascinating because they were simply a political movement that understood that if you wanted to really have power against the church, you need to operate like a church. You need to be able to get that tax exempt status and be able to fight the same fight in the same battles. And I think that it was a very strategic, brilliant move. But the really, really frustrating part about the Satanic Temple is you have an entire religion that's based off of individuality. And you don't have any unifying message when you can be whatever you want to be. And there's a lot of people that still have that LaVeyan anger, and they just use the Satanic Temple to say, yeah, fuck you guys. We're going to do whatever we want to do now. You can't tell us no because we're here and we're allowed to be here now. And there was never really any sense of true community that was in there. So a couple of years ago, I went to, I thought that this was the most hilarious thing in the world. The Idaho chapter of the Satanic Temple was the first group to request the state capitol's rotunda for National Day of Prayer. They were just first to ask for it, so they were the ones that got it. And it was completely nonviolent. That's literally all that they had to do. And I meet a bunch of people that are a part of this organization. I go and take a bunch of pictures, and I'm trying to find people that are my tribe of people. And I actually found this veteran guy, and he and I connected really, really well because his whole point was, I fought for this country so anyone can believe what they want to believe. That's why I'm choosing this one. Is it all needs to exist, and the fact that it all needs to exist is it culminates in the fact that this one also gets to exist. And there's such a great value in American values for that. But then I meet these other people that are trying to organize other protests, and they get me involved in their private communications for organizing. And they were trying to do this 4th of July protest. And in the chat, they say, okay, so we've got a couple of American flags and we've got some lighter fluids. So you guys, just so you know, this is what we're going to be doing. And I'm like, No. uh, you guys are burning American flags? I'm not down, not even a little bit. And they're like, "What are you coming after our freedom of speech? This is protected under the First Amendment." I was like, "No, I'm not telling you that you're not allowed to do that. I'm telling you that if you do that, I'm not hanging out with you. Like, I want nothing to do with you if that's how you guys are being a part of this. You guys are simply going to people and being in their face and being an asshole just for the sake of being an asshole and saying that you can. The whole point of why I do all of this is to have conversations with people to let them know, hey, there's room for all of us, even someone that you don't agree with. Like, it's a conversation of love and compromise versus trying to come right into your face and saying like, hey, we get to be here too. And I, I can very much understand what it is that you're talking about with the gay rights movement, because when I talk to my gay clients that are just trying to live their lives, they're not trying to thrust it in people's face. And I can understand where you're coming from, where it's not the gay community, it's the, hey, we're all just trying to live our lives. Why do you need to throw what it is that you're doing in a very, very loud way that is not a part of my life? And I get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, one of the and actually that's a I'm glad you brought that up because when I start talking about psychosocial in both of these, both I'm not saying that everybody is doing things just to stick it to the man. I'm saying that for the whole idea behind psychosocial is my psychology is my inner workings of
Yeah.
my mind, my emotions, my consciousness. That's my psychology. But then there are societal expectations, and there's collective consciousness within within societies at all levels. So a family has a collective conscious. A group of friends will have a collective conscious, and they put expectations on one another based upon that collective conscious. And so the more you get away from the physical and towards the psychosocial, the less binary things become. And the more it's there is so many different reasons why a person would want to express their gender in a particular way. And Prince is a really good
Yeah.
example. David Bowie is a really good example. I mean, and I mean, we could go on and on and on about the way that people use clothing and hairstyle and uh, body gestures and body motions in order to express themselves in a particular way. And then
I
that is
certainly have done my fair share.
Yeah, and then the other part of that is now the society gets to evaluate your expression, right? Because it's a psychosocial thing. So when we say it's gender expression, well, I might not be expressing myself as the opposite gender, but someone else might see me and they're like, "Well, you're dressing like a girl," because the society is involved in that. So it's so and again, but that's part of our sexual identity is because we reflect that the society we express, the society reflects, and that affects our internal sense of self, our own sense of identity that is broader than just our sexual identity. And then I'll just real quick the last one, which is the most diverse, is sexual orientation. And sexual orientation is, we think of it mostly in terms of am I attracted to men or am I attracted to women? And we think that because I'm attracted to man, I'm attracted to a particular sex, and that's why it's called sexual orientation.
But that's
That's
not the
not really the
Kinsey scale
case.
whatsoever.
Yeah, it is my sexual orientation are what are the things that I find sexually attractive.
Yeah.
Now on a very broad brush, that's going to be like, oh, okay, I like women. But when I say I like women, I like people that dress like women and express themselves like women according to my culture. So the sexual orientation piece becomes it's dependent upon all these other things. And then there's I mean it's like, well, what are the things that make a woman attractive to me? I'm a I'm a butt guy. I'm a boob guy. I like red hair. I
And that's
like
interesting because what you go to initially is like the physicalities of like what are you attracted to, and the way that like the reason that I convey myself as pan is I think the things that are attractive are how confident are you, because
yes,
confidence is attractive, and
very much.
I doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, if you're a confident person, all right, that's kind of sexy. How active are you? Like, is it something that you would be able to go and do things? And those are not gender related for me. So the idea of what is sexually attractive has very little to do with what's in your pants.
Yeah. So there's really two things, and it's I mean this is the extremes on both sides. Uh, one extreme says that a person who is um, XY has to uh, has to the only way you can be XY is if you have uh, testicles and a penis. Number one, if you have testicles and a penis, you have to be XY, and those statements are pretty true. They again. There are there are atypical expressions, but those statements are pretty true. But then when it's like, oh, well, if you are XY, you have to dress like a man. Okay, well, where's that expectation come from? That's a psychosocial expectation. You have to, um, you have to, you have to, play sports. You have to. All these things have nothing to do with sex, right?
Yeah.
But they are psychosocial expectations of a gender. So uh, where the conflict comes is, oh, you can only express yourself in this one narrow way, where everything from uh, from genetic sex to gonadal sex to phenotypical sex to gender expression to gender identity to sexual orientation are all these things all meet my expectations of what your expression should be. That's not right. But the other side of that is, well, where there's well, I am this way, and because I'm this way, I am not an I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, and that there is no uh, and and that it's reasonable, right? So, and this is the gaslight. It's reasonable to take very drastic medical measures in order to interfere with the natural development of that genetic gonadal phenotypical side of us that is physical. So is it reasonable to and I'll use a different than just the gender identity. So a very common body dysmorphia within young girls is breast size. So a girl starts puberty early. She starts puberty before any of the other girls in her class, and she grows proportionately very large breasts right away. And all of a sudden she's like, "Oh my goodness, I've got these huge boobs and nobody else has boobs and nobody wants to talk to me and I feel like everybody's
Or there's
always staring."
unwanted attention.
Yeah, all this unwanted attention, so they end up with this body dysmorphia. Now, does it make sense to to surgically reduce the breast size when everybody knows within 3 years all the rest of the girls are going to go through puberty.
Yeah.
There's going to be this broad size. Perhaps she got really big really fast, but then she's not going to grow anymore. So literally, just letting things kind of work themselves out is a reasonable thing. Same thing for somebody who everybody else in their class has started puberty, and I thought I didn't have breasts because I didn't start puberty, but now I got my period and I still don't have any breasts, and everybody else has breasts and I don't have any breasts, and I hate my chest, and I want to get a boob job. I want to get surgical implants put into my body in order to make me feel better as a person. Now, is it possible to do that? We can, right? We have the technology. And can parents give permission for a 12-year-old girl to get a breast augmentation or a breast reduction? Yeah, in a lot of states they can do that. Is it something that we really want to do to have these irreversible? Because I mean, and so now I'll go with the gender identity. So do we really want to, when a child is 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, put them on hormones that is going to prevent them from going through the normal pubescent cycle that matches their genetic sex and their gonadal sex and their
the thing
phenotypical
about
sex.
Puberty is like, for as long as puberty has been puberty is an ugly, violent process. It sucks for everyone. There's a show on Netflix called Big Mouth, and it is one of the most wildly offensive shows I have ever seen. And at the exact same time, it is the perfect depiction of what going through puberty is. And, kind of an analogy that I think resonates more immediately in our family that does talk about this. Like, obviously, our family has tattoos, and that's something that we've always done. And tattoos are a very permanent change that you can make to your body. And people nowadays argue that, well, you can reverse it. It's okay if you need to reverse it. But my brother, he had you sign off when he was 16 to get the tattoo of the necklace that you have, the Trinity, and he had it on his arm. And, when we were at that point in our youth, the Trinity was very important. Brad also left the church like I did, and later in life wound up having that covered because he didn't want to have that thing where he made a decision in his youth go on into his life once he kind of figured out who he was. And I didn't get any tattoos till I was 18. It was 3 weeks after, and I was making my own decisions, and I was an adult. I could do those things. And I remember having this conversation with Mom once, about the idea of, do I support trans individuals and their rights? And do I support the ability for parents to support their kids in the way that the parents feel is best for their kids? And I was like, I have a hard time with this one because as adults, yeah, do whatever you want to do. Find your happiness. Like, that is the most American value, is the pursuit of happiness. Who am I to get in your way of that? But I know the research for smoking weed because I've smoked a lot of weed. And I know that men are not done with their brain development until they're 25. So I'm very, very, very glad that I didn't start smoking until after I was 25, because I don't have to deal with some of the same issues that people who smoked as a teenager have to deal with. The argument that I was making is, I don't think that any adult should make a decision for somebody whose brain isn't fully developed. That's a permanent decision. because, at some point they might change their mind. They might, have a new experience. Something might happen, but things are still forming for them. And during the formation of things, like, yeah, you think it's going to be one thing, but, does a caterpillar constantly look like a caterpillar? So at what point are those ideas fully fleshed out? And for me, I don't think really people figure who they are until their mid 20s. So do I want to see kids have these things happen that are permanent and then put them into a situation where they could potentially be really, really regretful of the situations that they were a part of earlier on in their life once they really have figured out who they are? Maybe they're not going to be trans individuals. Maybe they're just gay, and maybe they just don't know how to express themselves because that's a really hard emotion to uncover when you're first going through it. And because there's confusion, maybe it's that I don't know that I like men. Maybe I just think that I'm a girl because that's how society wants me to be aligned with that. And it's tough to say that every single parent is doing 100% good for their kids.
Yeah, and there's and you know that but that's always been the place. And but then it's like, oh, okay, well, when does society get involved? Um and there's uh so when is it reasonable for society to regulate certain practices uh so that uh, they're not misused? The tattoo thing is a good example. So you're not allowed to get a tattoo until you're 18, unless your parents sign for you. There's um, there's there's is it reasonable for for a young girl uh, who's um, struggling with their breast size, uh, and everybody in their family, all the women in their family have that same breast size, and and they're having a real identity problem. Um, uh, might there be some cases where that's a reasonable thing to do, to have a reduction or an augmentation? Maybe, possibly, but there's a role for society in regulating the access to that care until somebody reaches up an at least an age of legal consent. And you're absolutely right that there's, with a lot of things, um, people. The difference between an adult who is 24 and an adult who is 34 is almost as drastic as an adult who's 24 and an adolescent that's 14.
Yep. That's
So,
like, and the idea of why people don't hang out with someone so much younger than them is because it makes them a creep, is because there are stages in your life where you start to have different realizations, and at some point you realize my mindset is over here, and it's not like if I'm I think it's a general consensus. If a 29-year-old guy is dating a 19-year-old girl, he's probably doing a little bit of manipulating.
yeah, there's all these unintended consequences. It's like, okay, when a 14-year-old is you know I just want to be a girl, and I don't want to be a boy anymore. I just want to be a girl. And there's all this now. There's this societal uh, attraction to where if you come out as being something other than what you were assigned at birth, you immediately become a hero. You get a community that's going to support you. You get all the there. So for a young person to go from having no friends to all of a sudden everybody thinks I'm the greatest person ever, that's a huge thing. So then you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to block your puberty. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then that person is 27 years old and they struggle with erectile dysfunction. Um, that is there. So there's a big difference between having a tattoo on your arm that you regret and not being able to get uh, a satisfying erection for the rest of your life.
100%. 100% there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's
I
not
can
being able
cover
to,
up my tattoos.
yeah, but and then it's like, oh, well, I mean, you're from a very, very young age, now you're having to take additional hormones just to get an erection, or you're struggling to have a child because your sperm count's really, really low. And the only way that you can have a child is through in vitro fertilization because you're never gonna produce enough active sperm to reproduce naturally. So now, oh, but I can't afford IVF. It's not covered by my insurance program. There's there's all these things that that we don't that we're when we're trying to solve. And you made a really good point that puberty just sucks for everybody. We're trying to solve this this temporal problem. And when I say it's a temporal problem, people are like, "Oh, well, you're just dismissing it." No, I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying that it's a temporal problem and that it's a problem of the moment. And you don't know if it's going to be a lifetime problem, particularly when it comes to uh, any of the things that we've talked about with regard to sexual identity. Many people, uh, you know, go through life in their hometown and everything is normative. So I'm a normal boy. I've got XY chromosomes. I've got a scrotum. I've got a penis that works. It functions. I'm attracted to girls. All these things go like it is. But then all of a sudden you get to college and you're not in your hometown and
Yeah.
you're not around the because again this is psychosocial, right? So it's my psyche and the society and the interaction of my psyche and the society that do this. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. Now I want to I think I'm gay, or now I want to express myself in a different way. So I'm going to remain a man. I'm not going to do any surgery. I'm not going to do any hormones, but I'm going to wear dresses. Maybe I don't want to deal with the social consequences of wearing dresses during the day. So I'm going to try and marry a woman who understands my kink and lets me dress up as a woman when we have sex or whatever. So there's all kinds of things that can happen later on if you don't pigeonhole the person when they're 13 into making a decision that is that is that is not just permanent, not just permanent like a tattoo is permanent. It's permanent and life altering. The ability to have a satisfying sex life is is uh, is a very, very key um, uh, aspect of quality of life. Not being able to have sex is a significant um, uh,
Bummer.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I was at my catechism last night and we were talking about the church's uh, uh, sacrament of ordination, ordinary. So becoming a priest. How does a priest decide to become a priest? So the priest is talking about, what it was like for him when he was deciding to become a priest. And literally, like almost the entire conversation was about celibacy. He's like, I want to be a priest, but the only way I can be a priest is I got to be celibate. And then once you make this vow of celibacy, then you've got to live with that vow of celibacy for your whole life. So the whole thing was was
That was his
about,
sacrifice.
yeah,
Yeah, and it
the
was
the
a
whole
big
thing about that.
sacrifice.
Yeah, and the only way you can get that job is to give up your ability to have sex. And it's important because, people who are monogamous, regardless of your sexual orientation, but people who are monogamous, um, well, you are agreeing to not have sex with like everybody else, right? So you're going through the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, okay, well, I can have sex with this person, but I'm sexually attracted to this other person and I cannot have sex with them because I've agreed to be monogamous with this other person. There's So to a certain extent, everybody who is monogamous agrees to a certain a certain low level of celibacy, and that I'm not going to just act on my sexual attractions because I've made an agreement with this other person. Well, this is just saying, well, I'm just plain not going to have sex at all.
Yeah, it's just making that agreement with one more person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's interesting. There's an anecdotal story of one of my clients that I think would be really interesting to kind of end on. And it's a guy that I've known for about, say, 4 years now. And he's talked about relationships, and he's definitely someone who sometimes presents a little bit effeminate. And I've seen him at pride parades before. He's very active as an ally in the community, and recently broke up with a longtime girlfriend. And he came into the shop, and we were talking about, like, okay, are you gonna get back into the swing of things? And he looked at me and he's like, so I downloaded Grinder. And like, him saying this, it was like one of those, like, okay, yeah, that's not a surprise at all. Like, I know who you are. Like, that's not a surprise. And I asked him, I was like, so what is that? Because you're in your late 20s. Like, I think you just turned 30 recently. And you've never pursued that before. And now as an adult, how is it that you're coming to that decision? And he's like, well, I mean, it's just always been something that's on my mind. It's always been in the back of my mind. Like, am I attracted to guys? And like, yeah, I know that I have been attracted to guys in the past. I know what I've looked at in the past. And I just kind of figured, I'm not going to know unless I know. So I didn't really talk too much about, what kind of dates are you looking for? But a couple haircuts passed, and I was following up with him. I was like, "Hey, how's dating going for you? Like, are you still swinging for the fences right now, and just like trying to swing at every ball that's coming at you from whoever, or are you pursuing one side over another side now?" And he's like, I went out on 2 dates with men, and I didn't really. It's not that I was uncomfortable, but once I was in it, I realized it just wasn't me. And I have no problem with it, and I wasn't uncomfortable in the situation, and I didn't feel like, oh no, this is wrong. But I just realized it wasn't me once I presented myself. So it was this opportunity to actually see whether or not those feelings were accurate for me. And yeah, I still think that there's some of those fleeting things, but there's nothing that I would act on anymore. And that was one of the ways that he and I actually really related, because there are many men that I have found very attractive throughout my life. And I've been very open about that. I have no problem talking about it. And I always love making people really uncomfortable that think otherwise of me. And I had explained to him, I was like, there's a couple of times when I was a teenager, and I used to really, really mess with some of the guys at the venue that I would go to all the time. And I'd kiss dudes, and it would mostly just bother them more than it bothered me. But it kind of helped me realize, like, okay, it's there, but it's not my main attraction. And that's okay, I think, for people to be able to experiment and figure out who they are. And that's one of the ugly things about puberty that I think people really should embrace. Like, okay, let's see how things go. Okay, is this working? Okay, that's working. Now try this. Is this a good thing? Okay, let's really figure yourself out. And one of the, I think one of the topics that you're kind of hitting on is as soon as these initial ideas come up, the experimentation stops. And it's like, okay, well, that's what it is now. That's how you feel. And here's where it is. But I really think that, humans kind of discover things through messy processes. We learn a lot of what not to do by doing things wrong. And it's not necessarily that it's a wrong decision, but it might be wrong for the individual. And you learn from that, you move forward from it, and then you just have a better understanding of who you are as an individual. And, it's always been one of those sayings of like, college is your experimental years. You kind of figure things out in college, and you do a lot of things in different sexual ways than you would as a teenager because you don't necessarily know who you are as a teenager. You figure it out in your early 20s, so that way by the time that you're out of college, you know who it is that you are. And it was just interesting because I've never had an adult that was close to 30 go through his experimental years knowing who he was as a fully formed person. And it is something that we had a really, really great conversation about. Okay, so when did you realize that it wasn't you then? So yeah, I think that there's a lot of agreement that can be made as far as whether or not things should be permitted for parents to make decisions for their kids before their kids have really figured out who they are.
Yeah, and there's and to me um it's it's nowhere near in terms of the seriousness, but it's very similar, I think, to uh the societal abortion debate, in that I think we talked about this a couple of episodes
Yeah.
ago. My concern is uh, that the person inside the other person is a person, and they and there's the religious side of me is like, oh man, this is a human being that is should be valued and respected in the same way as every other human being is. But I recognize that I live in a society that doesn't follow my religion, and there's no expectation for them to follow my religion, and even within the confines of my religion, there's an order of love. And if uh, uh, there's there's so sometimes women are suffering with some condition of some kind, regardless of whether it's a psychological condition or a physical condition, but doesn't their ability to have a child doesn't match the their ability to conceive a child. So
Yeah.
they can get pregnant, but they don't have the ability to have a child for whatever reason. And I understand that, and I completely don't think that we should have laws that completely banish women to hopeless lives because of an unfortunate night, that what they consider to be an unfortunate night. But again, there's for me, I'm like, oh well, it is fortunate because now there's another unique human there, and that human is at the very least entitled to a humane death.
Yeah.
um and so that's there. But again, it's like, oh, okay, well, the decision of the parent, the mother, has has the most impact the person that is most impacted by that mother's decision is the child who doesn't get to be born.
I can't disagree with that, but I guess they don't have the ability to speak up because they're getting evicted.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
I mean, they're so as long as they live inside the body of another human being, then
yeah.
that human being, that's the conundrum. That
It's
human being has bodily autonomy over everything inside their body.
the argument you made the other week was actually it's one that I've talked a lot about in the shop. And it was interesting because I have he's retired. He worked in the California prison system for I think close to 30 years. Very, very, very conservative. Older gentleman. I think he's in his early 70s now, and he's pretty active in his church. And he came in the other day, and he doesn't like talking a lot of religion with me because he knows I'm not the most religious person, so he doesn't necessarily want it to be trying to evangelize to me. And I told him, I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I'm having these talks with my dad every week. Like, I'm okay with having conversations with you. It's not like I think you're trying to do anything. And actually, he was the one person that I think I told you about him, that he was anti-death penalty because he was pro-life, and I was so impressed with the fact that he was the first example of somebody that I thought had consistency in his values. And we wound up talking about the fact that you had brought up this argument of we need to stop defining it as when does life begin, but when can we already acknowledge that science agrees that pain occurs? And as I'm telling him your reasoning and rationale that you gave, I told him this one argument that my dad made is the closest I have ever been to your side while still sitting where I sit. And I think that it's a really, really interesting conversation to have because I think that it could actually change a lot more hearts about what the process is. And, having been somebody, I used to protest with an organization called Rock for Life, and it was a very, very, very pro life organization. And I would hold up signs on the side of the street corner of aborted fetuses. And I know what that process looks like. I know that it's a violent process. I've just always been more on the side of I really believe in women's rights of bodily autonomy. And that's, the political statement that I need to agree with is people are free to make the decisions that are different than what my views are. But I couldn't make that decision. That's why I got snipped. I don't want to be put into that position where I would need to make the decision. But I think that the argument of abortion is healthcare does fail to acknowledge some of the aspects of what is happening with certain types of procedures of abortion. The concepts that you had with mifepristone, how it's a much more compassionate way of performing the procedure because it's chemicals that cause cramps and expulsion, is a more compassionate way of ending that life as opposed to what will essentially dismember it. And I think that that's one of the things this last week that I was really looking at in making a comparison of the left and the right. And I think that the left has a lot of blind spots that they just don't like looking at and they don't like acknowledging. One of the things that I read this week, completely unrelated, is how Mexican cartels had authorized enforcers to start using drone warfare against U.S. Border Patrol agents in the exact same way that drone warfare is happening in Ukraine and Russia. And the article that I was reading had a hashtag blind spot of the left. And I was like, this stuff is happening. I know for a fact this is happening because I watch drone videos all the time. All the time. I'm very aware of what's happening in combat. And to see how conflict has evolved over the years is really interesting, I guess, is probably the best way of saying. Like, it fascinates me. It's a morbid, horrifying reality. But to see how it has evolved is interesting to me. But I know I'm not the only one that's paying attention, and I know that if violent people are doing violent things right at the doorstep, that's probably not the best thing at all. And that's one of the things that I do think that conservative Americans don't necessarily shy away from unpleasant news. And they're a lot more aware of things that are actually happening that are of deeper concern. So when people are talking about, oh, babies are getting torn apart and getting torn out of their mother's bodies at, the third trimester, it's like, okay, yeah, they don't want to hear it because they don't want to necessarily believe it. But some of that stuff is happening. Now, is all of it happening? I don't know. I haven't seen all of it, but I have seen some of it, and I do know that some of it does exist. Again, I argue for bodily autonomy, but which one of the bad things do I want to have more of? Do I want to take away the rights of the living, or do I want to not allow the unborn to start life? Like, both of those things to me are bad things. I put my weight in the one that I put my weight into.
Yeah, and I'm like, the uh, restricting abortion procedures in some states is not reducing the number of abortions that are occurring in the
No,
U.S.
not at
in
all.
any way, shape, and form.
If
And
anything,
so, I
it's
mean,
just
it just the
increasing
numbers don't
dangerous
have. In
ones.
fact, it's kind of ticking up a little bit. People are for whatever reason, but what it does do is it increases the number of those abortions that are later term. So since the number of abortions isn't changing, but the lateness of those abortions, all we're doing is increasing the amount of suffering associated with abortion. So my what I would like is it, and I don't know how it would work within the political system because it just doesn't seem possible, but a compromise where, oh, okay, early abortions are easy to get, and as long as you're there's as long as you're getting your abortion before somewhere between 12 and 15 weeks, you ought to be able to, it should be inexpensive, easy to get, no real questions asked, um, except for the lateness of it. Because again, a chemical abortion in a later term still tears
Yeah.
a baby apart. So the earliness is to me the critical thing, and 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 but by doing that, you you require pain management for the later procedures. And if we had a national law to where it didn't restrict a woman's right, her autonomy over her body, but it had the impact of reducing the suffering associated with abortion, that for me would be a win, because I don't want women in Idaho and Texas and Alabama to have to wait and try and figure out how they're going to travel to Colorado to get a later term abortion that is more painful for the child.
Yeah. So, well, this is a happy note to end on. Any other fun stuff that happened this week that you wanna end on?
uh, uh, no, not really. I mean, I'm in school. I'm learning Greek. So that's a a bit of a challenge.
What,
Um,
learning Greek is hard?
Yeah, and whenever I talk to you about this, it's so funny because I'm diagramming sentences, and I'm diagramming sentences from the Bible. But you had that when you were being homeschooled. You had to diagram sentences from the King James Bible.
Oh
I
yeah.
got to diagram Greek sentences.
Yeah, but like to circle back to what we were talking about earlier in like the written language, I had a lot of interesting writing papers because of you being who you are.
Yeah,
I always tell this to my clients about like the way that I was punished as a kid. I was like, there's one of two ways that I was punished. One sucked a lot, and then the other required me to like look up the word honor in the dictionary and then write an entire paper on what does honor mean because I lied to you.
there's well, there's I made lots of mistakes as a parent. I know that.
I do have some good news. I interviewed a girl on Sunday, and she is accepting the position, so she'll be starting at the beginning of March.
That's fantastic. That's great. I'm really happy for you. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
and that other
And I'm happy
thing.
for her too. I don't even know her, but I think there's I mean, I think that you're just a great leader and you know you've got a wonderful shop. You've got a great vision for it. So I think it's going to be a good place for her as well. So that's
I think so too. Yeah, and I do things a little bit different than a lot of other shops with the way that I interview people. Because you know, in my past career, I interviewed people. I was part of a hiring process, and when a company let go of 1,400 people, I was the supervisor that was responsible for getting people interview ready for their next career option. So, like, I'm very familiar with the hiring process in a corporate world. But doing it for myself, I'm like, okay, this is my happy place. How do I really find the right person for my happy place? So I go and meet up with this girl for coffee, and I was like, I'm going to be really honest with you. Um, Whatever preconceived notions you have of an interview, just fuck them. Uh, Literally, I'm just gonna be me in front of you, and I don't want you to put any kind of fakeness at all. Like, let's just be weird. Let's be ourselves. Because if you're working in a barber shop with me, that's what you're gonna get. So I'm not gonna try and fake who I am to you. But the real interview isn't today. Today is me telling you how I operate my business. What I actually do is give you a couple weeks to work for free. And I just want to see you work in your space once you get comfortable. And after 2 weeks of me not charging you rent and getting to watch you, I can say, hey, I think you're going to be a great fit. Here's a lease offer. Let's get going. Or I can say, hey, I don't think this is going to work. I can feel good about putting some money in your pocket while you're still looking for something else. I hope things work out well for you before things go bad for us. And that's worked out so well in the past for me because it's prevented me from hiring three people that would have been absolutely devastating to my business. So she's got her real interview coming up in March, and that's what I'm really excited for, is to see how things will actually work out. But I the stress that I have been in the last week and a half of it's gone now.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to win, you know, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. You got to, you know, when you get knocked down, you're not looking you're looking for a win.
Well, and that's I was talking to one of my clients about this, and you know, coming into this administration, I don't know if I told you about the whole like ostrich optimists analogy. Did I tell you about that at all?
There's I think we had a conversation about it. It's basically like I'm as long as I'm not looking around, I'm happy.
Well, so I think that there's three people post January 20th. And I was talking to my therapist about, you have ostriches, and that's like that guy that I was talking to at the Super Bowl. He's got his blinders on. He's a very happy person. I'm jealous of these people because I'm incapable of turning my blinders on and just enjoying life. But the next group of people is optimists, and I'm not. Like I'm a bit too pragmatic. This is not what I voted for. I'm not happy about this. I'm not going to be like, "Oh, yay! The government efficiency department is doing wonderful things that need to happen in the process that I approve of." Like I'm not going to put on that face. But I'm also not going to be a defeatist for the next 4 years. So I was telling my therapist, right now I feel like I'm in this really dark place and it's my responsibility to find gold nuggets. Like I have to do this. Um and you know, the whole rebranding that I'm doing with my barber shop. I this last week I had kind of a real realization of how I created this. This situation that happened is very unfortunate. It's, you know, two barbers quit without notice, and um, I wasn't given any reason for what happened, and the not knowing, I think, is the hardest part of everything. Um, my my assumption is, because of the fact that I have made changes to the shop and I'm going more towards what my original vision was, that there was a compromise that I made at one point in life. And when I first brought the team on, instead of shooting the direction that my vision was, which my lease agreement said that I was doing an art gallery and that I would choose the art that was going to be on the walls, I decided to make a decision that would unify the three of us. And I did kind of a video game nerd culture shop. And it was great because it felt like our shop. And we were all really, really like, that was our personality that connected us. But it's that whole shooting analogy of like, if you're off by a millimeter, you give it enough distance and it is not your vision whatsoever. And where I'm taking the accountability is I recognize that me going back to my vision was destroying something that felt like our shop, and going back into saying this is my shop. I'm gonna take that accountability, and I'm going to recognize that the lesson that I needed to learn is, if you have a vision, do not compromise your vision ever. Do not compromise your vision. If you've got something, you need to go full force and let people know this is what I'm doing. And I understand that now. But this whole art gallery thing came up because of a conversation that I had with a venture capitalist investor. And he wanted me to be able to demonstrate that I am capable of managing multiple businesses in one space, being able to connect the client base of one to the atmosphere of the other, and really manage multiple things under one roof. And I know that I can do that. I'm perfectly capable of doing that. And I was telling somebody, you know, there's two people that I could be. I could be the person who walked into something that I was absolutely capable of doing, or I could be the guy who got thrust into a bunch of chaos in the middle of it and then still succeeded. Which one of those speaks more volume to me? And that's the gold nugget that I'm trying to find. And I posted about it a couple of days ago on my social media. Like, I'm doing everything this year to create the person that I know I'm capable of being, and I'm not there yet. But I know that the person that I'm going to be at the end of this year, after all of this, is going to be cool. And I'm really excited to start walking in that person's shoes. But I need to build the road that gets me to that person, and I have to go through the chaos in order to do it. So as much as I hate what's happening right now, I know it's good. And it's like your point. I just got to win. I need one more win, and then I can get right back on track. And then I'm that person that I want to be.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm real confident, you know, in you. Like I said, I think you're a great leader. You you've got just so much talent and so much skill. I'm as confident in you. I might even be more confident in you than you are.
That's good. Mom was talking to me last night, and she's like, you know, if you need any help, just let me know how I can help you. And I was like, I really appreciate that you're there to help me however you need. but there's a weird sense of pride that I have never had, that I know I can do this, so I want to be able to say that I did this. And I'm not in a place where I need help yet. So if I am in that place, I'm so glad and so very thankful that I have support around me that's able to help. But yeah, I think this is gonna make me a cool. I don't think it's gonna make me cool. I think I'm going to be cool with the person that it will make me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's well, I'm glad you got to win this week, and I'm looking forward to hearing the story as it evolves.
Cool. Well, I think that that's us for this episode of Supper Talk. For all of you who have been paying attention through the past couple weeks, again, thank you for giving us a couple of hours of your time every week. If you're not already following us, right now we're on YouTube and we're on Spotify. If you can give the show a review, if you've been listening to us, that would be a huge help. It actually does promote us out to other people, and then we can kind of help promote this message of building civility within families and trying to rebuild relationships. And we would absolutely appreciate that. So, again, thank you so much. And until next week, hope you guys have a great week.
Take care, y'all. See ya.